Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. This is the account bringing you the news report for day 318 of the war in Ukraine. Starting with this report, I will add an additional category to the news segment called Russia and Belarus. The situation in Soledar still remains foggy as both sides claim different outcomes. We will take a look at the latest news during the flashpoints along the front. I also have one article I want to point out again. Else there's only been minor news to report. I grouped them all into the usual news segment consisting of the situation inside Ukraine, the occupied territories, the new Russia and Belarus category, and the international developments. But as always, we take a look at the flashpoints along the front first. Soledar. Throughout the day, pro-Russian accounts claimed that Ukraine has abandoned Soledar and Krasna Hora, and Russia is marching forward unhindered. However, as it turns out, Russian propaganda blew the reports quite out of proportion. The reports quickly changed from Soledar is under Russian control, to we control the center, to we control the south. All we know for sure is that Wagner managed to break through Ukrainian lines, pushed rather deep into Soledar, and that Ukrainian forces counterattacked and managed to push Wagner back. The most likely scenario is that Ukraine controls the northern part and Russia the southern part, with the middle area being a grey zone. Nonetheless, the situation is dire and battles are still raging. The situation could change in either side's favor at any moment. The spokesman of the Eastern Group of Forces, Serhiy Cherevati, said in an interview that Russian occupiers do not control Soledar in the Bakhmut direction. Heavy battles are taking place there, and the enemy is suffering maximum losses. Cherevati promised more information at a later date. Journalist Yuri Butosov shared a picture on social media today taken inside northern Soledar, clearly showing Ukrainian forces are still operating inside the settlement. Bakhmut. Heavy battles continue in and around Bakhmut. According to Ukrainian claims, Wagner lost 18 killed and more than 24 wounded mercenaries when an attack was stopped by snipers of the State Border Guard Service of Ukraine. Reportedly, a rifle unit advanced on Ukrainian positions, but snipers managed to take out the commander of the unit, which caused the unit to panic and flee. And now for the highlighted article by the Ukrainska Pravda, titled Russia's Full-Scale Invasion in 25 Photos from Ukrainska Pravda. The article tells the story of the war in 25 pictures. As journalists have been documenting the war since day one, each photo is shown with its own story. Be it the liberation of Kiev, Chernihiv and Kharkiv oblasts and of the city of Kherson, the defense of Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts, Iranian drone attacks on Kiev, mourning the fallen heroes and civilian victims of this war, attempts to evacuate pets and animals during shelling. The journalists have always been there. Please check out the article. And now for the news segment, starting with the situation inside Ukraine. Huliaypole in Tavriia Oblast has been shelled over 200 times over the past day. According to the national police, Russian forces used tanks, mortars, and MLRS to fire on the settlement. Despite a supposed 36-hour truce, Russia has continued to shell Ukraine over the Orthodox Christmas. Ukrainian authorities reported at least 3 civilians killed and 14 injured. And now the latest developments inside the occupied territories. Jambulat Zauraev, son of a representative of Ramzan Kadyrov, has been killed in Zaporizhia Oblast. His father confirmed the death of the 34-year-old. Russia has increased mobilization efforts in occupied territories. As reported by the National Resistance Center, Russian authorities are planning to mobilize 2,000 civilians in Horlivka, Donetsk Oblast. The National Resistance Center also reported that Russian engineering and sapper units have arrived in Svatove and have begun studying the dam of the local reservoir. The center alleges Russia might be planning to blow up the dam in an effort to slow down the advances of the armed forces of Ukraine. Russia could also use this as an excuse to forcefully deport local residents. The General Staff of Ukraine reported in its morning update that Russian authorities have forced about 3,000 employees of the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant to obtain Russian passports. According to Serhiy Haidai, head of the Luhansk Oblast military administration, partisans have destroyed a railway track near the town of Shchastia, Luhansk Oblast. The track was used by Russia to transport ammunition, military equipment, reinforcements, and stolen Ukrainian grain. The commander of the Tavriia operational and strategic group of troops was quoted as saying that Russia has no longer any deep rear area at the Tavriia front. According to him, Ukrainian defenders are doing their best to inflict maximum damage on Russian forces. Tavriia is a subregion in southern Ukraine stretching from the Dnipro River to the Molochna River, which is running through Tokmak and Melitopol and to Crimea. Moving on to the latest news from Russia and Belarus. According to the latest assessment by the Institute for the Study of War, many Russian officials and military bloggers continue to criticize President Vladimir Putin for his January 5th ceasefire announcement. Especially since hostilities continued unabated in Ukraine, many argue the Russian leadership is putting soldiers in harm's way. The Patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church has said Ukrainians and Russians are one nation divided by politics, and that the Church is doing everything it can to prevent them from becoming enemies. According to him, everything is done in Ukraine to paint Russia as the enemy in the eyes of Ukrainians, and the Orthodox Church is the force to unite this nation. The representative of the U.S. Ministry of Defense, Laura Cooper, stated in a briefing that the Pentagon sees the Wagner PMC not as an independent structure, but as completely controlled by the Kremlin. The interaction between Wagner and regular units of the Russian army is not traditional, but Wagner is clearly not operating independently, but as part of the Russian military. Cooper further noted that Wagner is using Russia's resources in an innovative way by recruiting prisoners and sending them to die by the hundreds. And to wrap up the news segment, the international developments. The United States has announced it will start training Ukrainian troops on Patriot systems later this month. According to Laura Cooper, the training will take several months to complete. The Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin has told Ukrainian Defense Minister Oleksiy Reznikov that the United States will start encouraging NATO members to transfer air defense systems and armored vehicles to Ukraine. Meanwhile, the Italian press reports that the US has asked the Italian government to send air defense systems to Ukraine. According to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania, Gabrielius Landsbergis, Russian President Vladimir Putin wants negotiations not because he is magnanimous, but because he is losing the war. He said that now is the time to increase the intensity of the war, not stop it. Both Finland and Poland are ready to provide Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine. While Finland said it is waiting for a relevant decision made by the EU, Poland is ready to provide its tanks based on approval by the German government and how quickly replacement tanks are being delivered. And now for the intelligence update segment. Starting as usual with the UK Ministry of Defence. Fighting has continued at a routine level into the Orthodox Christmas period. One of the most fiercely contested sectors continues to be around the town of Kremina in Luhansk Oblast. In the last 3 weeks, the fighting around Kremina has focused on the heavily forested terrain to the west of the town. With the coniferous woodland providing some cover from air observation, even in winter, both sides are highly likely struggling to accurately adjust artillery fire. As is typical with operations in forests, combat has largely devolved to dismounted infantry fighting, often at short range. Russian commanders will highly likely view pressure around Kremina as a threat to the right flank of their Bakhmut sector, which they see as a key for enabling any future advance to occupy the remainder of Donetsk Oblast. And to wrap up the report, the evening update by the General Staff of Ukraine. Despite the announced so-called ceasefire regime, the Russian occupiers continue to shell the positions of our units with tanks, mortars, and barrel artillery. The enemy is concentrating its efforts on conducting offensive actions in the Bakhmut, Avdiivka, and Liman directions, and is trying to improve the tactical position in the Kupiansk direction. In Novopavlovsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson, the enemy continues to conduct active defense on previously occupied lines. In the temporarily occupied territories, in the city of Melitopol and the settlement of Priazovskoye in the Zaporizhia region, the occupiers stopped broadcasting all Ukrainian TV channels, only Russian TV is broadcasted. And that wraps up another news report. If you're interested in any of the articles I mentioned, as usual, you can find the links to them in the description. Thank you for tuning in and have a great day. You were listening to The Account. Slava Ukraini.